Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. March 27th, workshop meeting of the Portsmouth Planning Board. First item on the agenda is our Hanover Hill Street Avenue Downtown Overlay District. Two different issues related. They overlap at that location. Did you want to talk about this a little bit, Peter? Did everybody see the memo and what Peter distributed?
So,
Yes.
yes.
It was on the website, yes.
Yeah.
I have it right here. I'm looking at it.
After the last work session, you wanted a further comparison of, or to add CD4W to the comparison. So I put that in the main things from the dimensional charts, comparing CD5, CD4, CD401, and then adding CD4W. And then also adding that to the use categories. This isn't all the uses, but the bulk of the uses in the table. And then I'll just go through this, and then we can go back to anything you have questions on. Showing the existing zoning of this area, and then a proposed map that was from the 2020 recommendation. With one addition, this lot that's at the end of Rock Street, which is 66 Rock Street, that's currently CD5, and then so adding that if it went to CD4, I think that would be appropriate. And then looking at the building height along Bridge Street and Hill Street. Currently, it is the brown 2 to 4 stories, and as the discussion last month was to make that green along the front of Bridge Street and then down Hill Street. So that's what this map shows. And then initially it was so on this map the black circles represent the North End Incentive Overlay District, and then the black hashed line is the current downtown overlay. There were discussions to pull the downtown overlay to match the North End Incentive Overlay and kind of clean it up along the lot line where it abuts the Foundry Garage. There was some further discussion in October about changing some of the downtown overlay boundary elsewhere. You've had further correspondence from Mark McNabb about that, so I just prepared some additional areas for discussion. It can be separate from the Hill Hanover discussion, or we can talk about it together.
Let's do this
I'll
first.
stop there, yep.
And then we'll get to the other part of downtown.
Do the hill part first.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we can take them, we can take the height and the zoning separately.
I'm very happy with the height because it's what I asked for.
How does this compare to what the petitioners wanted?
I think it's in agreement. I think they
I
want
think,
it.
yeah, that's why I
For
think
the
it
height
is.
part, I
Yeah.
think it is, yeah.
Is it strange? I get what the height part found your place between the Heineman building, I don't know what to call it, and the garage. It's a big jump in height. You're 65 feet on one side of the street and 35 on the other. And then you go just north of that, down towards Deer Street, you're back to the 65 on both sides.
I think part of that is two things. One is a transition to the neighborhood, Creek neighborhood, you call it?
Islington Creek.
Islington Creek. But the other, the green going down to the cul-de-sac where the hammer is, or whatever's in the middle of that. I think
Yeah.
it's a hammer.
Smart.
That's city property at that retaining wall.
Right, yeah. So
It hasn't really been resolved what's going to happen with that. You weren't on the site walk down there, Frank, but there's the Heineman property, the plan that we talked about at the last meeting, there was a little blue area along there. That's city land. It's kind of an odd, can't get there parcel that wraps around the Heineman building and goes around to the side of the street that I can't think of the name of it.
Rock
Goes up
Street.
Rock Street.
That is Rock? Okay.
All the way to the corner of Hanover is, all that grass there
Yeah.
is all city-owned property.
Yeah.
Is that where, I think it's like a park there right now?
Rock Street Park.
Yeah, okay.
Little basketball court.
Yeah.
Yeah, the park's on the other side, and then the city has a little strip that, it's an L-shaped strip that wraps around the Heineman property.
Yeah.
361 Hanover, since Hyman's not there anymore.
Okay. Well, the old building with the parking lot in front of it. Whatever.
So I'm just trying to imagine being on Sudbury Street, looking out a window. Do I want to be looking at a parking garage? Or do I want to be looking at a residential structure?
I can tell you it doesn't matter, because from my house, I see the parking garage, right? Because of the residential structures. So we all
I don't know where
look
you
at it.
live.
I'm on Langdon, so I'm like 2 streets. So you have Rock Street, Brewster Street, Langdon Street. So I can stand in my backyard or in my second floor, or if I go up to my 3rd floor, I still mostly see parking garage, because all of our houses are so small. So we're just trying to find a way to transition from those high buildings into the neighborhood, and that's why this request.
I hear everything you're saying. I'm still, if I was on Sudbury and I was looking due north, I'd rather look at a residential building that was 40, 45 feet, and maybe a little bit of garage than 30 feet of garage, and the lighting that goes with it.
You actually don't, because we're up higher than the parking garage.
So I understand, Tony, you're talking about having a little bit higher residential building to block the garage? That's the concept you're trying to?
That's what I'm trying to
Get
wrap
your
my
mind
head around.
around.
Like,
Yeah,
to
okay.
me, and like if I'm standing there, I'd be like, this is, I mean, I see the garage from my house on Dennett Street, and it's a wall of light, and I would much rather be residential structures 65 feet in front of it that have broken up light a little bit, rather than this wall coming at me. So that's just me, as my, one person's opinion, and so that's what I was hoping to have for a discussion is, what do people think about that? Like,
I think you have to keep in mind that because of that retaining wall that sits outside there, where the 361 Hanover sits is what, 6 to 10 feet up off of where the road is, where the parking garage starts. So you already have a good 10 feet difference in height. So if you're now putting things there that are 2 to 3 stories high, it's really like looking at that size building.
And there's 2 issues there. There's the building, but then there's also the lights of the garage. I've wondered why the garage has to be quite so bright. But-
It's actually slightly less bright than when they first turned them on, because we
yeah.
all did complain.
Yeah,
It was really bright when it
I
first got turned
remember.
on.
Yeah. It's still pretty bright.
But those lights keep that area safer than it ever has been before as well. So you have to look at it. It's a double-edged sword. That used to be a very dark area of our city that wasn't extremely safe to be out at night, and now it is.
I understand. And more development will also enhance that.
Yep.
So, you can put the spotlight on it when there's nobody around, or you can have more people and activity, and that also enhances things.
Yep.
So maybe
Agreed.
maybe the rheostat could be turned down a little bit as it develops. How do you feel? Tony, are you comfortable with it? You want to talk about it more?
no, I could go either way on it. I think the neighborhood would probably appreciate the lower height. But I also wonder if they're looking into the details of what these things mean. I'm doing a Google Street View of it now. It's mostly blocked by the Heineman building. I don't think you're going to get a wedge. I mean, you might get a little bit of more blockage if you allow buildings there, but not significant, because you can't do anything to the left of the garage, or south, I should say. So I'm fine with this.
I think given the conversations that we've had, it's pretty much where the neighbors want it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Any other discussion on this one?
On height? No.
How about the,
So I was looking down the comparison of the CD4W with some of the other stuff, and especially, because some of the things brought up were eating and drinking establishments. There's more allowed in the CD4W than the CD4L1. When we're talking about, like, if we're putting the front of the lot at CD4L1, it seems like that's actually better than CD4W.
What's the number in the parentheses mean?
That's seats, like how many,
Occupancy.
yeah,
sorry.
occupancy, yeah.
So, for example, in CD4W, it's permitted up to 50 occupancy, and with a special exception, it could be up to 250. And currently, it's permitted up to 500, and with a special exception, it's 500 plus.
And the CD4, but the CD4L1, those are just not permitted.
Right.
And the comparison between CD4L1 and CD4W is minimal on pretty much all of the dimensional standards.
how about just a restaurant that's not an eating and drinking establishment?
Is that, what?
Yeah, how do you get a restaurant that's not for eating and drinking?
Lunch.
Oh, you're talking like cafes, but those are still restaurants with eating.
Eating, yeah.
Not be alcohol.
That's what I
They're
meant.
still eating and drinking.
Yeah. Well, I think this means alcohol, but,
Certain kind of drinking.
yeah. Are coffee shops allowed?
So if I understand correctly, the argument was to take where we're putting CD4, where CD5 is now that we're moving to CD4, to actually make it CD4W. Is that?
That's what the
I
neighbors wanted.
Okay.
Right.
I want to make sure I understand it
Yes,
correctly.
yes. Yeah, there was some confusion, I think we all had, why that, because that's for the West End, it was created for the West End.
Right.
And as we know, there are eating and drinking establishments out there in the West End.
Some good ones, yeah.
Yep. So, I don't know, we'd want to preclude,
I don't think we are precluding anything with the difference between CD4 and CD4W.
But it's L1, isn't it?
It's L1 that's much more restrictive,
yeah,
but I
and
think.
so I'm leaning
what's
away, I'm leaning
proposed.
away from L1.
No, I like L1 where it is, but we're also changing other things from CD5 to CD4, which really changes minimally. And I think their argument is where we're changing it from CD5 to CD4 to make it CD4W.
Right, but not
Adjacent.
L1, right?
No, not L1, but leave L1 where we're proposing. I definitely think that's
I think
appropriate.
the question is, says, where, if we leave CD4 L1 where they're proposing it, are we okay with adding a coffee shop? It's not allowed right now under L1.
We already have one right there, so it's not a problem.
Sorry?
Gesundheit.
We have some already in the neighborhood, so bring it on. There's enough coffee drinkers. I see them all drinking their coffee.
So you don't have a problem with adding that?
I think it's just the occupancy, right? If you're going to have something permitted, to have it permitted to be smaller. I think that was what they were hoping for.
So Peter, in your memo, you've got proposed on page 4 as CD4L1. And the
Right.
question really wasn't the question to make that CD4W? Wasn't that?
No, I understood that the CD4L1, where it's proposed, is good.
Okay.
But behind that, in the other areas where it's now all CD5, we've proposed just to change it to CD4, and they said, could we do CD4W
Right, okay.
instead of
Yeah,
just CD4?
that's right. Now I remember.
That's what I'm
Peter.
remembering.
What equates, what's the square footage per occupant or occupants per square foot? How does that math work out?
For what district?
Well, I mean, you're having, just in general, for CD4W, 50 occupants.
Oh, in a restaurant?
Yeah.
Or,
Does that relate to a square footage? It must, right?
it's based on the building and fire code, you know.
But it's a square footage.
It probably, yeah, square footage.
You don't know what the-
I don't know what their
Okay.
requirements are.
I mean, otherwise, you've got a CD4 actually has, and CD4W are very similar. They're 50% lot line build out. I guess CD4 is 90% building coverage, where CD4W is only 60. 200 feet building block length, open space is, a difference of 5%. But you do add in the lot area per dwelling unit in the CD4W, which you don't have in the CD4, which I think would be a nice addition to have that in there as well. So the more I looked at it, the more I was sold, shall we say.
If anybody's interested, it's 15 square feet per person,
Ah, there you go.
750 square feet for 50.
So you'd still need a special exception if you wanted to make it bigger than 50, right? So you'd have to actually argue it.
That's
as to where it would
probably
fit in.
50, just for reference, that's probably the kitchen. It probably has an occupancy of 50.
No, when we're
The
talking
dining
50,
area would
we're
have the
talking,
occupancy then.
we're talking people visiting, not staff.
Oh, you mean the kitchen
The kitchen, a restaurant.
restaurant?
If you're visually trying to understand how,
There's a place called the Kitchen.
Well, I know there's a kitchen, but I don't think our occupancy, when we're talking about occupancy in our zoning, we're talking about people that go and eat at the
Right.
establishment.
Well, I think
No,
Tony's
that's
saying
how-
it's about
You meant the
50
kitchen restaurant, not, I was
person
thinking you're thinking of
restaurant.
a space that, and that's the size of the kitchen.
Oh,
He's trying to give an example.
oh,
of
you're
a
talking about the
restaurant.
kitchen on Islington Street.
Yeah,
so,
so that would be permissible as opposed to like.
so when you're,
bigger.
when you're saying, when you're looking at that zoning and it says occupancy by right, it'd be 50, and in my head, I'm like, what does that look like?
What does that look like? And you're thinking of the actual,
Restaurant,
the kitchen,
Yeah.
Restaurant that has the name, kitchen.
which is, makes
With
me
a
so
kitchen.
confused.
I would hope.
Just to get your head wrapped around the scale and size.
Right.
Peter, can you give me an example of a performance facility? This seems to be the most restricted of all the use categories.
Jimmy's Jazz and Blues Club?
Well, that would be like a nightclub.
Okay.
I mean, a Jimmy's would
Musical
be.
performance.
No, Jimmy's would be
Okay.
a nightclub.
What's the
But
difference?
so-
I'm gonna see if it's defined, because
Music hall.
They serve alcohol too, and you sit and watch people
It's
sing.
accessory, it's accessory to the performance center,
Because you're not doing it while you're watching.
and it's smaller.
Seacoast Rep, that could be a performance center.
Mm-hmm. Rios Art Space?
VS Art Space.
It's allowed by special exception in CD4W.
That's probably that theater, right?
We do have a theater in the West End, yes.
West End Theater.
What's the N, S, special exception in N, what's N?
not permitted.
So it's,
So, yeah, performance facility is based, there's a size.
oh, okay, so a certain size, special
Yeah.
exception, too big, can't do it. All right. The neighbors have asked for CD4W.
Is this the only L1 area in the city? This is a new creation?
No,
L1's been
L1
around
is-
for a while.
So on the map, all this is L1. I mean, I have highlighted these, but really this is the only portion that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But this lighter
Orangey.
I meant-
salmon color is
Mm-hmm.
L1.
I meant anywhere else in the city other than this?
Court Street has
Yeah,
CD4L1. Yeah,
Here, I'll show you
all that orangey
all this
color.
is L1,
Yep.
Okay.
and then this is L2, but CD4W is only right here.
It's funny, Court Street was actually really where that hall started to go down from CD4 to something else.
I just wonder, I'm looking at this, if we're looking at making changes to what L1 is, we have a bigger impact than just this neighborhood.
We're not changing L1, we're just changing where, this
Where it
area
applies.
that it
Well, we
would
talked
apply.
about allowing coffee shops
Oh.
in this area.
Right, now
Well,
we're back to
wouldn't that
that,
be-
you're right.
But that would be on the Foundry Place side, based off of the zoning.
No,
because-
now we're back to the question that I raised with Tony suggesting, should we change and allow coffee shops in L1? That's a separate question. So
Oh, I
before
don't
we,
think so, no.
let's talk about this area first, CD4W or CD4L1. Residents want CD4W,
Where we currently have proposed
where
CD4.
we propose CD4 from 5, going from
Correct.
5 to 4,
Four
and
to
instead
four-
go from, to
5.
4,
5 to
4W.
4W.
4W. Which would be along Foundry Place, right?
This is getting confusing.
Yeah.
My understanding is that they want a W because it would be more restrictive than what was there now, right? And we're now comparing that to L1.
No, compare it to CD4.
No, we're comparing it is CD4, and neighbor comes to us and says, we want CD4W, which is the west end. And we've asked the planning staff, say, hey, can you do a comparison chart, would include L1 in that?
No, we asked them to add CD4W to it, because that was what wasn't on there.
Of these three, it appears CD4L1 is the most restrictive.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And so, again, the neighborhood asked for CD4W. L1's a little bit more restrictive.
They asked for the L1 where the L1 is. They asked for the backside on Foundry to be CD4W. That was my understanding.
That's my recollection also. So, Peter, there's no difference between 4 and 5 on the whole, these different uses?
Not on the uses, it's just the dimensional requirements.
Dimensional requirements are
Okay.
different. That's why they're split out up above.
Everyone else super clear?
I think so.
I get it now.
Okay, good. It took me a while to wrap my head around it, so.
So, we're talking about
What's
that.
highlighted in blue, yep,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Basically, that brown becoming CD4W, right?
And that one sliver too, right above it, right?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that as well, yeah.
So, from Bridge Street along Hanover, that brown would become CD4W, that would become CD4W, correct?
If that was,
Fine by me.
All good with that?
Yep. Yes.
Then this stays CD4L1,
Yep,
next to the adjacent CD4L1.
yep,
Well, actually, this doesn't stay, this becomes CD4L1.
yep.
So, height, we're good. Zoning, we're good.
Yep.
Downtown overlay,
I'm good with those changes as well.
so in this immediate area, it would move the downtown overlay from Hanover Street to follow the north end incentive overlay, which is the black circles, not, and then currently the downtown overlay includes 66 Rock Street. We would pull that back to follow the north end incentive overlay around this municipal property.
So the,
So the-
sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Just can you remind us what the downtown overlay means to the property?
The downtown overlay,
No parking.
no parking requirement for non-residential uses, and you can't have residential uses on the ground floor. You get a 4-space credit for any residential uses, and that's the bulk of it, so.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What credit?
So if you have residential, you get to subtract 4 spaces from your parking calculation, so,
Gotcha.
yep.
The theory being there's a parking garage.
Yeah. Why aren't we grabbing more existing properties that don't meet parking?
That's a segue into.
that's the next part we're gonna talk about, and
You told me to bring this up at this point, remember? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, if we're good with
Right,
this corner,
right.
we can then go look at the other corner of the city that we want to expand.
Actually, I'm talking about this area.
Right.
so there's a general principle that everybody should be aware of in zoning. You typically, when you have an overlay or a zone change, you typically wanna do it at the back of the lot lines, so that the buildings on a street that front each other are similar. You don't have a major zone change running down the middle of a street, generally speaking. So it is odd that the downtown overlay in this case came down to the street corner along Hanover. And I've said before, I think the reason it did was the idea of a corner store of some kind. I'm just guessing. But it doesn't fit with the zoning across both streets from that location, and that's one of the concerns of the neighbors. So it's not a rule by any stretch, but just as a general principle, when you're thinking about making a zoning map or how to come up with something, think of it as fronting across the street as, if not the same zone, at least something similar, because, you don't want to look out your window, and if you're in a Cape at a big glass box, that's not going to feel like you're in the same neighborhood.
That certainly wasn't always the practice in Portsmouth, was it?
Well, historically,
In 400 years of history in the city.
well, look at Market Street. I mean, that's over 200 years of the brick that was rebuilt after the fires, and they're very similar. So,
So this change would mostly be bringing it in line with kind of a best practice rezoning.
yeah, it would be, it's coming along Rock Street, but by pulling it back off Hanover, it is making it more conforming with the neighborhood
Yeah, I
along
guess
Hanover.
mostly in reference to the Hanover property.
Yep. And that, what I just mentioned, is going to come up in the next discussion after we get done with this stuff.
I see what you're saying. I agree in principle with it. It's just weird to be moving the line around this area and to leave lots that are non-conforming with,
Such as, where are you thinking?
well, I mean, the corner of Autumn and Hanover, that property came before us and converted that first floor retail to residential, which is not allowed in the overlay.
It's not
Not
in the
retail,
overlay.
commercial to residential, but they only have 3 spaces for parking. And so they had to come before us for a relief. But since it was a less demand, that was the argument, we approved it. So that'll be non-conforming. The lots, page south of where Peter's pointing right now, all of those have 0 parking, pretty much 0 parking. No, in the, yeah, in that, right there, yeah. They're all on street, but they are all full residential, so it's kind of like this weird, it's not an area you could put them in with these 2 zonings to be there, but it's just, because they're first floor residential, but they have no parking, I don't know, so it's just I don't know, feels like it just never mind.
No, it's,
No, well, you're with respect to parking, there may be a need for a different overlay. You know, but that's a more complicated,
Well, so those buildings, I mean, let's be honest, they're ripe for redevelopment, those properties. I could see someone coming in, buying multiple, it might be the same owner on multiple of those properties and combining lot lines and trying to do something bigger. We'd be, under this zoning, that would be, under the current one, it would allow residential first floor.
correct.
But it would require.
Parking for non-residential uses.
For non-residential uses.
Yes.
It wouldn't require parking for residential uses.
No, it would. You have to have parking in the downtown overlay. Residential requires.
As it is now,
outside.
this is
Right,
outside.
but outside, you have to have both, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so,
we had one of those properties come in, I think it was the one to the left, for a pre-app discussion, and then it never came back. Remember that?
Which
I think it was not too far from you, right there, Peter. I think it was right in there.
I don't want to be,
Remember that?
yeah, because he was going to tear down 2
Yeah.
or 3 of those buildings. Yeah, then it's not going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I figured that, because they came in and then they just went away, so.
I'm not trying to get to perfection here,
No.
but I just think it spurs the conversation. If those buildings weren't there, would we want the development to provide its own parking, being a pitching wedge away from the garage?
That's a change in our parking requirements,
Or-
which
or-
I still think we need to overhaul. So I don't think moving the downtown overlay district is going to help in that respect enough, because even if they're in the downtown overlay district and they have residential uses, they still have to provide parking. So it's not going to help, is what I'm trying to say.
I
Even
think,
if we did.
as we are about to start the master plan, do we have a contract yet?
Yes, well, it's expected to be signed by the 31st, so.
Monday.
This is like,
Yeah, we can move on. I just think this is, I see
no,
your point.
your point is a good one, because it ties into what I was about to say. As we're starting the master plan, I think we really need to look really closely at the downtown zoning, because things have changed since this map was created. And there are things we need to be thinking about. I think this is the jewel. We have to be very careful with this. You know, there'll be dragons there.
Yep.
And I'm cautious about tinkering with it, because we don't want to mess it up. But there are things that, like the downtown overlay that, as it extends to the east, we should talk about it, because the existing downtown overlay was a political creation, totally. Just to put it out there. And does it make sense? Maybe not. But one thing our zoning ordinance misses, some regulations have A streets and B streets for different reasons, and you can have different requirements, you know, higher standards and higher requirements for retail. But like on Sheaf Street, which everybody knows where that is, right?
Yep.
That's mostly residential in there.
There's a little
And that's-
bookshop, I think.
There's a bookshop, and, you know, that's why I said mostly, and there's the other, I don't know what to call it,
Oddities.
the oddity shop, yes.
Oh, Deadwood's.
Definitely.
But I think both are fine, but why preclude one or the other, you know, which our ordinance does? Streets like that evolve and are more eclectic, those are a nice things to have downtown. But by not giving that block the same benefits that the other adjacent blocks have with being in the downtown overlay district, seems a little wrong to me.
This, I agree with 100%.
It had to happen once, right?
So the philosophy is you first do a master plan, then you do zoning, and you do a capital plan. So are we trying to push the zoning ahead of the master plan?
No, we've done several master plans. Master plans were preceded this zoning ordinance. What I'm saying is we are updating the master plan. I'm not saying we have to stop with any of these, and certainly not the Hanover stuff we've been talking about. I think we should go ahead with those rezonings because they've been on the table for 3 years or whatever it is. But I think we should look at, are there immediate changes we should think about while we're doing this in the downtown, perhaps the Sheaf Street area that I just mentioned? But in addition, Bill, as we do the master plan, I think that will inform whether we need to do more refined changes to the downtown based on the master plan results, and other parts of the city as well.
I have a question. In this map, as I'm looking at it, your green line is, you say you don't want it to go down a lot of streets. It's actually, if you move it into that Islington, Middle Street, Court Street area, is that appropriate? I guess, why are we moving that corner?
So here, you see the existing, just the
Yep,
black.
yep.
So that was, that included all this CD 4L1.
Yep.
And so this map was trying to put that out of the downtown overlay and pick up more CD4.
So like what we were just talking about, we
And
didn't
then-
want to add the downtown overlay to CD 401.
Right.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I understand.
And so that's why it captures, I mean, there is a block here on the corner of Pleasant and Court Street, that's CD 401, that has a, I think a realtor shop and then a couple apartment
Aaron
buildings.
Cruz place.
And then it would pick up Bank and then go along where it's existing on Court Street and then pick up
rest
the end of
it.
State Street, that's on State Street, that's zone CD4,
Right.
And not in the downtown.
and not in the downtown
Overlay.
overlay.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that corner. I just had the question about that corner, but I'm good with it.
What? Why the bank?
Before, let's wrap the Hanover and then come back to this. So we all good with recommending to council that we make the changes for height, the CD4W,
CD 401.
the downtown overlay with respect to that left side of the diagram that we were just, everybody good with it? We're not taking votes. it's a
Yeah, I'll put it
workshop.
on the April agenda,
Okay,
and then you can vote on it.
okay, good. All right, now let's go to the other part, and I also marked up a couple of things on this map. I can see it on your screen. So,
Oh, there you go.
so
I don't have
the area that Beth was just talking.
Sorry, whoa, 'Whoa. Sorry. There you go.
So, That was weird.
Well, it's a little sensitive.
Very sensitive. Can we make it a little bigger?
Okay,
So-
I'll try.
I tried to find a color that, there you go. See the magenta or the pinkish color on some of these streets?
Yep.
That was what I was saying. If we extend the downtown overlay, maybe some of these streets should be allowed to have residential on the first floor, not required, but allowed. And I just picked some of the ones that seemed obvious to me, like we've got those high-end condos in there and a parking lot here. Chief Street we were talking about, the court that I can't think of the name of it,
Custom House.
Custom House Court. The lower end of State Street is a mix, but there's some pretty high-end residential along there. And then this little stub. And then also Court Street. One side is pretty much residential except for the inn. These are the sorts of things, when you get into an area like the downtown where it's so fine grain, I think we need to think about it on a fine grain level. I'm not saying let's do this, I'm just saying these jumped out at me as things to talk about.
We do frequently get requests for development there that avoid parking, that ignore the requirement for parking, I guess is a way of saying it. Even at the last session, we're asked to affirm that this thing is okay, even though there's calls for 30 and there's none allowed, none given. So it needs to be brought into conformance with reality. If we think that no parking is necessary, then
Well, this directly ties into public policy because if you think about the downtown, and, we've got in that circle, well, any circle, think of the downtown, a lot of the surface parking that's left downtown is bank parking lots.
In churches.
And
Churches.
banks, churches, and a couple of municipal lots. Others have been developed by one principal developer. But surface parking lots aren't a good fit for a walkable downtown. As a matter of public policy. Now, I take the strong position we need another parking garage. And we need it on this map that's on the screen, somewhere in there. I won't be more specific tonight.
I will.
I will.
Well, we can be, but, so these are the public policy issues. If the city doesn't do it, private sector will build parking in one fashion or another. And that's parking that gets dedicated to that one single owner. So it's space taken up by storing cars that isn't shared. And again, that doesn't fit with a walkable downtown.
It's, since you highlighted these idea of these streets allowing first floor residential, I like most of them. I understand the current use at the end of State Street, but I like having that be a retail corridor. And so if people are there now, it's fine, but just pulling them down to the park through retail, I'd hate to lose any retail more there.
Given the strength of residential and how valuable it is, that's a valid concern. So, a shop that might not be quite making it turned into a residential condo, that's another thing to consider, especially in the current market. So that's a reason to not do what I'm suggesting and
Just
not
that
allow
one.
residential.
That's literally the only area I can think of
Yeah.
that I'm like, yeah, I'd rather not have that, because it's those are like the big walking corridors of Congress Street and State Street,
It's a big-time deal when the Prescott Park festivals are going on, yeah.
Because everyone walks down that street to
Yeah.
get to the park.
Yeah, I put up a toll outside my door.
But so for that portion, that's where my sole opinion is. That's the only, if there's gonna be a first floor residential allowance, I'm fine with what you've marked up, just with the exception of State Street.
I just marked them quickly,
Yeah.
really just to generate conversation. And the funny red was just what I was talking about earlier, of having the overlay following the street. And there's logic both ways, as Peter described, and, having it the way it was, which is mid-block. So, Again, it ties into the idea of having the facing uses being more similar. I don't feel super strongly about it on that one. It depends on what we do with the downtown overlay. What does the downtown overlay mean? I think the idea of the way it's been sitting for, what, about 40-odd years, that whole part is not in the downtown overlay, that's like 1975 Portsmouth, not 2025 Portsmouth.
I would be all for moving in and moving out the downtown overlay based off of this green. I think it makes sense based off of our conversation.
Should we add a provision for streets that don't require ground floor retail? To
I would
allow,
rather look at that through the master plan.
Well, aren't you a little switched on that? It said it doesn't allow residential.
On the first floor, right.
You mentioned retail.
yeah, I think, I had it backwards.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
I had it backwards.
I just think that's a deeper conversation with a lot more input for our downtown, and especially with the value of
I'm
residential
not going to
units.
argue with that. The master plan's right
So,
on the doorstep.
I
so.
say we expand and contract the downtown overlay as discussed, but we wait to make those conversations a deeper conversation as part of our master plan.
Would that have an effect on what the downtown overlay is, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what she's saying, to move over to this green. So what that would do is it would make these residences in here non-conforming.
Lawfully.
They're okay,
Yeah.
they'd just be
Yeah.
They're
non-conforming.
grandfathered.
Yeah, they'd be grandfathered. But if they wanted to change, they could, if they wanted to change to get bigger, that could be a problem.
You know, Sheaf Street has that, they're front facing on one side of the street and they're rear facing on the other side. It's a very narrow street. I wouldn't consider it walkable.
It's
It's
more
a two-
walkable than rideable.
It's a two-way, which people don't
Yeah.
realize.
You
They-
can't go down it.
I do. People are like,
Chicken.
Not two
"You
cars
know,"
at a
I'm like,
time.
it's two-way.
It's chicken, but it's two-way.
I walk it.
But those,
I drive on Cerro Street and I'll drive on every.
but Chief Street does call for some redevelopment of some of those buildings, the condition and whatever.
There's been some redevelopment
Yeah.
on there.
So
Well, on the corner, right?
if you lock it, so they cannot put housing on the first floor, then you block that, right?
Well, they could keep the current use.
They could redevelop
Yeah.
what they've got, and they could rebuild what they've got, but if they went to expand it,
They could have to get a variance.
yeah.
Get a variance, yeah.
And, you know, there's a logic to it, because that is the use of the neighborhood.
I'm fine with that.
So, should we put this on for discussion and perhaps a vote, or,
The only part I wanted to discuss was the extension to cover the bank.
okay,
Is adjacent to a very used public parking facility.
Yep.
And by allowing this to not have parking, put a lot of intensity right next door to it. I mean, I have no problem with this in a long vision of doing this, where we have a third parking garage and more resources for the city, but having, it's really tough for me, because we all know it's gonna be developed very soon, something. And, you know, that's gonna be with us for decades. So I wanna take a longer view of it, but I also, I mean, I guess it just comes down to this garage, you know, this is the problem we
yeah,
have.
and it is kind of a dangling participle there.
It is a little dangling. It's like a little earring.
I'd be more comfortable bringing it up to the other
Where it
side of it.
exists now.
Court Street?
And, well, even just one lot up.
I think if you bring it up, I think just that little dangling
Yeah, that's
goes
fine.
away and leave it where it is for
Yeah,
now.
that's fine. I mean, we can come back to it. It's not, I mean, this isn't permanence, but it just, a little nervous about.
I
Any other
can
opinions?
provide two clean maps showing it and not showing it. You know, showing these changes as they are, and then without that.
What are the other people's thoughts?
As far as that one part of, that one corner that you're talking about?
Yeah, where these guys hand mouse right now.
Those two, yep, right there.
Or anywhere else, if you want to talk about something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
The other thing we could think about, it just occurred to me, we could consider a provision that would allow a conditional use permit if you're on the edge of a downtown overlay district.
Interesting thought.
We could have special criteria. You know, we have to dream it up, but, you know, should
Draft it, not dream it.
have to carefully craft it.
Craft, there we go.
I'm looking at the edges and I'm imagining like walking down there. I think it's outlined pretty effectively as it's presented.
In the green?
Yeah. I mean, you could do that, a conditional use on if you're abutting the downtown overlay.
There's a logic to it.
That, the Citizens Bank lot would not be abutting the,
Right, if we moved
it up
The way
to-
it is now, it's not abutting.
And so the concern with the Citizens Bank lot is that if the Citizens Bank goes away and gets redeveloped into something else, then you'd have a parking issue?
well, by right, they would not need to provide parking.
Yeah.
And it's it's the proximity to the south end and an area with parking problems on street, and a overly used municipal parking lot.
Yeah.
That parking lot generates a lot of traffic from people just circulating, trying to find a space.
Oh, I've fought for
Yeah.
parking there. Yeah.
This is just a thought. I'm not
No, yeah.
I'm not sitting
It's a
here
good
like.
thought. It's a good
like,
thought. It's a
my-
good thing to think
My
about.
ideas aren't concrete by any means. It's still wet cement.
Let's have, like Peter said, have the two maps with that
Okay.
and without it, and then we can have another conversation about it at the meeting, right?
Okay.
And keep thinking about it between now and then.
And I mean to circle back to my earlier question, just so I know, for Sheaf Street specifically, when you refer to like dealing with it with the master plan, would that be adjusting what the criteria of what the downtown overlay is, or just where it is?
Well, what
For
he's,
that, in reference to
yeah,
Sheaf
what
Street.
he's talking about is making like exceptions for certain streets.
Yeah, and
from the downtown
For
overlay.
to deal with that.
I would prefer to, well, because during the master plan, we really reach out to a lot of people, and we could actually, I think, just get a lot more input from residents as far as how they feel about, you know, would you like to see this? Would you like to see this? And that would then inform us. And I just think if we put that as a task on the consultant to try to, you know, gain that information, I just think that would be much more helpful versus just outright changing it. But that's just my
Yeah.
thoughts.
I think what we're talking about, Frank, is changing the downtown overlay, possibly right away to something like the green. What I was saying, the pink refinement or addition to it was allowing ground floor residential where it's currently not allowed in the downtown overlay on certain streets. You wouldn't want to, for the reasons that Tony was mentioning, like if Market Street, if you could have ground floor residential on Market Street, the high-end stretch there between Bow and
There'd be no
Market
restaurants or
Square.
anything, it would just be condo.
Yeah, it would turn into condos and it would destroy the downtown, you know, so that's the idea. But Sheaf Street, custom court or custom house court, whatever that is, little things like that in the long term might make sense. I'm happy, I think we should postpone it because we're so close to getting the master plan started.
Right.
I just raised it for conversation because I think,
Just one last thought on the Citizens Bank lot. You know, in reality, there's no way a developer is going to get a bank loan to do anything and not provide parking for residents. I mean, the bank would laugh them out. Like, you know, what's your plan? You know, oh, they have to go find parking. Like, no.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would actually happen, but it is a
Aren't we
stress area.
seeing that happening, though?
Huh?
Aren't we seeing that happening
Where?
with some of the projects that have been approved recently?
For smaller, like, things, I think. I don't think for bigger stuff.
So your point is that if you can fund it yourself.
Well, I mean, I don't, what?
You brought up getting a loan for
I'm not arguing, I'm curious, what projects have been built that haven't provided parking of significant size? It might be a one-off, like a little lot or two, but like a, is
I seem
Foundry
to
has,
recall this year we're granting
The
238 Deer.
additional use.
238 Deer is probably the biggest one that we approved
Has
without
like
any parking.
22
The
apartments.
old VFW.
52 required, I can provide 20. 30 required, I can provide 0. Almost every meeting, it seems to me, we're doing conditional use for parking.
Well, that 30 required when we can provide 0 is a much smaller lot, I think is his point. I don't know about the Deer Street one.
yeah, I mean,
I was here for
those
that.
are literally across the street from a parking garage. I don't know, I'm just saying, I'm backtracking a little bit from my thought on this, but I think it'd be safer to certainly take it out of this downtown overlay. But I was kind of tempering myself a little bit, saying, in reality, is someone going to come here and propose, 100% lot coverage and no parking? I think it would be unlikely. It may not meet full requirement. That's a good point. I just can't imagine them getting a loan from a bank without, the banks want to see how you plan on selling these units, how is this? And
Even
so-
in this market.
Yeah,
And to your point, like, do you want to bank on that?
right, so.
We've also had discussions at this board, though, about do we want to require developers to provide parking because it's an enterprise for the city.
Right. City makes a lot of money
So
with
we're-
parking.
We're still kind of trying to,
If we had a garage, I would say no parking for that reason. It's just,
Force them all to pay us, yeah.
that's a plan for the,
But even in anticipation of that garage that hopefully will be coming, because it is a placeholder in the capital improvements plan, we shouldn't have a lot of private parking get constructed
Right, right.
leading up to it, and then everybody go, well, we don't need it now, and that you've started construction on it. And we've got these disparate private parking lots that now some other private entrepreneur will make money on, which is happening right now.
and we might find during the master planning process that in order to rationalize having conditional uses waiving parking requirements, that people have access within walking distance to things that they would normally drive to. Richardson Market can only supply so much to the downtown. You have one little market. It's not like other cities where you go to where it's like, hey, wow, there's a store.
Right.
There's a pharmacy, within walking, our West End has pretty much everything you need, and some would consider that walkable from the downtown, but is it? If you're on Chief Street, for example,
I do it
Are you-
regularly, and I live at Ruth Lou and Griffin Place.
well, there you go.
And, Coast Bus, there are some public transits. I do not own a car, I do not have a license, and I find Portsmouth pretty walkable.
All right, if Ryan can do it. then-
I can tell you that I know some of the people at the feaster rooms, they all go down to the grocery store without cars. I've
I
talked to
do
several
it.
of them. Yeah, a lot of people do it, believe it or not.
But, I walk a lot more than a lot of people do, so.
Yes, you do.
So we're going to come back with two maps.
Yeah.
All right.
And what's the purpose of that? Do we want to change the character of that quadrant of the town?
Are you back to citizens quadrant, or we're looking at, I think what we're talking about is
Between
more,
Daniel and
this-
Court?
the difference over this area, I think, is the biggest change from the this dotted black line down to green.
With the intent of changing the character of what's there?
Changing the parking requirements and the first floor occupancy requirements. That's the biggest change with the downtown overlay, right?
Yep.
In order to make it commercial rather than residential?
On the first floor.
First floor. And it's not a tonight decision, Bill, so think about it, and,
Yeah.
we'll,
But that's really the question. isn't it?
right, right.
So parking, those today they can't provide parking without a major reconstruction of their lots. we see that now. We had a request last meeting, for, even though they were having a less demand, they had to come back here and ask for it. So to me, the parking side is less of an issue. It's more the character that you're talking about of things.
I wouldn't want it to be high-end housing. And I'm not sure what you do to prevent that.
Well, we're making it harder for them to provide that by moving this, so it would be more commercial.
And is there commercial looking for a place to be?
Not offices, that's for sure.
Please?
Not offices, that's for sure.
Yeah.
No one's
Yeah.
looking for office space.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think having those small shops that are not right in our core and a little bit on the outskirts of our downtown overlay are usually a little bit less costly. So I would say having that variety is important.
And it might give them opportunity to relocate downtown if they don't have to provide parking.
Right, exactly.
Say that again?
I said it might give them opportunity to move to a downtown location where they wouldn't have to provide parking.
So keep in mind, outside residential, once you're in the downtown overlay and you're commercial, you don't have to provide parking. So it's making it easier for commercial to exist there.
Back about 15-ish years ago, the city had an in lieu parking fee downtown. And I know for a fact, because I was on the Blue Ribbon Committee, that kept some businesses out of the downtown because they couldn't afford it. And in that case, say if you wanted to bring a restaurant in, it was typically going to cost between $60,000 and $300,000 just out of the gate to get started. And that's a lot of upfront money.
They ask
wanna
for a
hear
lot
that?
of variances over
Yeah,
that.
if you want to hear that nightmare, let's go get a beer afterwards.
Yeah.
I'll,
Give you the background on that.
Pouring through historical maps, trying to find out what was there in 19 whatever, counting parking spaces that didn't
It'd be
exist.
interesting to know how much revenue in lieu of the city generated.
Not
through
much
that
because they
policy.
couldn't
Yeah.
afford it and they would go to the ZBA.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was also, there's heavy restrictions the legislature put on what the city could do with that money, and it was just a difficult, not a good system.
Nope.
Several beers.
So we'll have a couple of maps to talk about on this. And
Are we moving on to building footprint?
So there was some correspondence from Mr. McNabb about this. This came up for his project on 1 and 15 Congress,
Right.
and kind of brought an issue to light about the existing condition downtown, where our current definition of building footprint basically includes buildings that are connected by a firewall or common walls. So most of the blocks of downtown would be counted as a building footprint per our definition.
even though they haven't been, because it
Even though
hasn't
they
come up
haven't.
before.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, I remember why this was created or why this definition was put in.
Well, it's a big
Was
box
it
restriction.
When Port Walk went in, or no?
Yes,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
Port Walk.
right. So,
It's the whole reason we have character districts now was because
Right.
of Port
Yeah.
Walk, right? So we started all of that. That was when I first joined the planning board. And this was to keep from people just putting in a firewall every so many feet, but building the same building, right? So I think we should have talked about a grandfather into that based off of existing buildings at a certain time frame.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we can backtrack on that. But it was to not let new construction
Right.
have just a giant big box that takes up an entire block with no breaking up between it.
I've read this 10 times, and I'm listening to you, and I'm still unclear. Anybody else?
So all these buildings, you look at Congress Street, right? All these buildings are owned in property lines.
Yeah.
So if a property owner becomes all one property owner, that's considered one building versus three different buildings. if you think of it simply.
So
Just
it's like the old rules with lot lines. If you had the same lot line, it became,
it becomes merged. In this case, if you're going to buy 3 lots in a row on a street where all the buildings are connected, even though they're separate buildings, that's now your building footprint is all 3 buildings
Can you put it up
based
on
off of this,
the building footprint?
without a grandfathering in of buildings existing before a certain time. And that's, I think, where we went wrong.
but what is the harm?
So,
Well, in the downtown, it triggers, so in CD5, you can have a 20,000 square foot footprint, CD4, you can have a 15,000. And then you can go above that through an incentive, and then you have to do workforce housing and community space.
the problem is if you have this building and you have this building, now they're considered one, now it puts you in a precarious redevelopment state, right? To have all these buildings that you are under common ownership. It's like, how do we allow them to unmerge them for building
Oh,
footprint
but at the same
purposes?
token, someone who has a clean slate comes in and they're like, we're just gonna put a wall up and make it. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
So from a, think of,
Help them
think of a
understand.
walkable downtown, and now think about the front of a, just gonna use it, Walmart. So you get a big Walmart that can have a little architectural detail that makes it look like the kind of a street, but you only come in at like 3 locations on a 1,000-foot long building. That's not what you want downtown, and that's why this came to be. The problem is, we've got some locations in the downtown where, just because of the old configuration of buildings, and we had one application that came in like this, that front on 2 different streets, and they front on the streets in a nice manner, but then they connect in such a way that this footprint triggers the fact that now they're over it. That's not what was intended
Nope.
at all. And it's not a bad, the second example I gave is not a bad thing. That's a good thing. You can have some larger buildings can be okay in a downtown if they front the streets properly. That's why parking garages are often embedded and they're lined with retail.
This seems to me like it should be a special exception.
Or conditional use permit.
I mean, sorry, conditional use. It just feels like it allows some creativity without sending them to the zoning board.
Right.
Well, right, yes, it does. If you want to go over the building footprint, it is a conditional use permit.
Why can't we leave it like that?
Well, it's just unique to downtown where you have these blocks of buildings that are essentially one footprint. So if somebody puts an addition on,
But what are the conditions? What conditions would they have to meet to qualify? Because we have the generic conditions.
I'll pull up the zoning.
I'm thinking of, it doesn't matter. I'm just thinking of there's some large parcels that could be developed that, if they're creative in their design,
Right, so.
That's the thing, yeah, if the design is good, it's all a function of design.
CD5, you can go up to 30,000 square feet, and then you have, these are all the conditions. So ground floor parking shall be separated by a liner building, 50% of the ground floor shall be dedicated to parking. I mean, this is one, there are several types in here, but, Yep.
To make myself more clear, I have no problem with the historic saying, hey, if this is historic, it's fine. That's fine. But I'm wondering if there's a problem with just the ordinance on moving forward on newer projects where it's not historic.
no, I don't think so.
No, I think
Yeah,
it works
yeah.
for all newer
Right,
projects.
right.
What it doesn't work for is rehabs of old buildings.
So that's what we need to think about, is a historic exception or provision.
Grandfather, provision,
Some-
whatever
yeah.
you want to call it. If the buildings have been existing since before this definition was enacted,
Right.
that would be what I would look at as being an exception to the building footprint definition
Yeah,
or something like that.
We've talked about that a little bit.
We have.
So,
so we can
when we come
talk
back,
about it some more.
yeah, when we come back with some language on that, to leave it as is, maybe have an exception for historic buildings, is that,
Existing buildings
talk
at
about it?
whatever,
Yeah.
timeframe we want to discuss or Makes sense. I'm good with that.
Simple as good.
Yeah. Yes.
And we put solar and wetlands at the end again.
Um,
I don't have those open.
I didn't have any time to do anything with the solar. I know you talked about having the board look at that webpage on solar.
There isn't a possible new, excuse me, alternate member who's, I've talked to and best talked to, who actually works for a solar company. So we may have somebody on the board
Maybe worth waiting.
who knows something about it. Something more about it, excuse me. But do we need to talk about this one tonight, or?
Is this anything that somebody is pushing us to get done right away, or is this something we can wait?
I think it was a council referral.
Okay,
But
I guess I
it's-
can guess what council.
I can too.
But it's not pressing. No, nobody's coming.
No one's coming and
But
looking to try to
ground-
do this,
ground.
then I would like to wait till somebody has a little bit more
Okay.
information can
I'm good with
help us
that.
Since we actually have somebody I assume is in process of getting here.
The staff's been working on it. So, the wetlands draft, has that been circulated at all?
It hasn't.
Okay.
Well, so we're not going to talk about the wetlands thing,
I was gonna
except
say,
all
I don't
I'll
remember
say.
seeing that one.
No.
Yeah, it has, there is a draft.
Okay.
So here's the situation. Right now, we have wetlands conditional use permits that are, people are allowed to
If they're
do things
improving-
in the wetlands buffer, basically, which is 100 feet. And you'll see them almost every meeting. We address wetlands conditional use permits. I think we push it a little bit with allowing them when maybe they don't completely conform with existing criteria, and especially in areas that have been previously developed. On a what I call a greenfield site, where you basically don't have any buildings in historic use, there's no reason to violate the buffer, for example. But there are a lot of areas in the downtown and areas adjacent to the downtown where that 100-foot buffer, like the south end, it affects a good deal of the south end because of the various water bodies that you bring that 100 feet in from different directions. So there's a draft that can be circulated to just leave everything the way it is, but then provide an exclusion for what I just described, for existing conditions that are already built up. The applicant would have to show an improvement to the environment, which is what we do.
Site.
Which is what we do.
Yep, we
And
do.
we've been doing, but it doesn't say that presently. So the process, and I've discussed this with Peter Britz, is anybody wants to come with me, more than welcome to. I'd go to Conservation Commission to explain it with them, get their support hopefully, and then have this board provide its support if you guys agree, and then it'll go to council, of course. But just to make it conform with what we've been doing. It's kind of like the HVAC variance thing we talked about, where the ZBA has granted 32 out of 32 variance requests. Well, that's a situation you shouldn't need a variance if you're doing it all the time.
So they would not need a conditional use under that?
No, they would, but there'd be a reason for it, because right now, if we're challenged in court,
Got it, okay.
we have a hard time justifying it.
So it's really just codifying what we're already doing.
Exactly,
Got it, okay.
exactly.
Yeah, I'm good with that. It's exactly what we just talked about the footprint.
Yeah, same idea.
Same idea.
I talked with the city attorney about the affordability in co-living. Co-housing is next. It is possible. We have to find a way to get part of that under innovative land use controls under the statute. And the legislature, the only thing he and I could think of offhand was parking, especially in the areas away from the parking garages, was to provide some relief for parking. But the legislature has a lot of bills pending restricting what we can do with parking. So his recommendation was, let's wait and see what they're doing, because it's a daily, what the heck are they doing down in Concord?
There's a couple of months of stuff, and at least 10% of the bills in Concord deal with housing.
And parking that relates directly to it. So I think as we consider expanding co-living and co-housing, which is co-housing being slightly different with detached, smaller, think of it as like small houses, but they aren't really houses with a shared facility that's, so it's more of an outdoor experience than the co-living, which is all inside one building. And some areas are doing it, they're very successful in some locations. And it's a way to provide additional density in a pretty nice way in neighborhoods that aren't downtown. So I'm not proposing it tonight. We need to see what it looks like. I can show, you know, I think in the right location, it could be pretty cool. So next steps. But that's the answer to your question. Yes, it can be done. We've got our eye on it, and that would be the way to do it.
Appreciate that.
I do think we need to look at expanding co-living to other areas too.
I agree.
I think it would make sense in at least all of the character districts, and if not, also the Gateway. But that's just my 2 cents.
It'll be interesting to see economically how it works out with an existing building that gets converted. And if it, and we can talk with UTIL about this, does it make sense from the ground up as a new construction project? I don't know, you know?
I see them more as conversions of office
Yeah.
space that are just sitting out there.
That's what they're doing in most other cities. The last thing I know, Peter and I met with the EDC, the Economic Development Commission, 3 weeks ago, something like that. They've had meetings or discussions since we met. They're very interested, they want to help with the master plan process. And I talked to Tom Watson, their chair, today. He called me. They're pretty excited, actually, about doing what they can to help with the economic components of the master plan. And I said, that's great. So let's have you work with the planning board and UTIL, the consultant and staff, to figure out how that can best fit. He said they would like to prepare the first draft of things to get the conversation going based on the prior economic sections of our existing master plan, and whatever UTIL comes up with after they've done the first assessment of what we've got in the city for, you know, what's happened for housing in the last, 10 years since that was last done.
10 years. Yep.
What else has happened since then? I said, if you guys want to do a first draft, that would be great, because they get conversation started. So they're excited and on board and ready to rock and roll, and hopefully we'll really have a signed contract sometime in our lifetime.
Just a question or a comment. There was reference to the House and the Senate bills that have been going around. A big one is House Bill 631. Any urban area in the state, and they take a very liberal definition of urban. Raymond is considered urban. Any commercial property zoned in an urban area that has sewer and water by right would be allowed multifamily up to 65 feet. And I think and they put on guardrails for cities and towns to prevent doing funny stuff with zoning, like, all right, but you have to do, 80% retail. They limit the first floor to 20% retail, which would be problematic for our city. I'm in support of the law in general, personally, but not in historic areas.
On a real downtown.
And Portsmouth has done so much for housing, probably more than anybody in the state. I can't say that from data,
Yeah,
but
Manchester's actually done more.
the two cities, yeah, you're right, Manchester's done a lot. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to, the board or the department or someone to, highlight what we've done, and look for relief for communities that have done X or whatever. I don't know. I just, while I'm supportive of it, I'm not supportive of it in a historic area.
Which bill is it?
I think
631, and I think
Is
it's
it a House bill or Senate bill?
House Bill 631, and I think Senate Bill 90 is its sister bill.
talked to Attorney Jane Farini, and because she monitors all the bills for the city,
Yeah.
and the legislative committee can put that on their list.
And there's a lot more. Those are just the two ones that are dramatic. That
Oh,
were
there's a
like-
lot of them.
like,
I
wow,
see
like
them
that's-
come through
Well,
my
that
email
flies
all
in the
time.
face of what we were just talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a problem. That's
All this
people-
careful planning, and it's just like, nope, you have by right, you can just do multifamily. So I didn't see any exclusions in there for historic districts, but which could be and I get what the state is doing, because communities can be like, oh, well, it's a historic district, and therefore you can't do it, And so the states, the folks that are putting this bill together are like, we've tried coaxing you, we've tried everything, you aren't doing it, we're gonna make it a state mandate.
We
So-
tried the carrot.
Literally, that
Now
was
the
the
carrot
article.
getting the
It's like,
stick.
this is the stick.
Carrot and the
We've
stick.
the carrot hasn't worked. This is the stick.
So tell me again that, what you said is up to 65 feet for,
Going by memory, which is
if they're
dangerous.
on
You've
sewer
seen my
and
memory.
water.
House Bill 631 says any commercially zoned property in urban areas, and they have a very liberal version. Like I said, Raymond's considered urban. Any commercially zoned that has sewer and water, those areas will automatically be, by right, allow multifamily up to 65 feet with a limit of retail at 20% the first floor, I think is what I read.
How does that align with our GNOD?
I'd be surprised if that passed.
It has full support, a lot of support from one party and half support from the other party so far. So I don't know. It's
Yeah,
just,
the other one was 2-acre minimums, and
yeah, there's those, yeah.
that one got a lot of support on both sides.
That'll pass.
So just to put it out there.
We might want to provide input, well, I think we should provide input. Does it have to be through the legislative committee?
It would be best to at least let them know, because the city does try to coordinate all its efforts when going to, so I wouldn't want to do anything without telling them or
Is Jane,
consulting them.
is Jane the best contact to
Yeah,
get to them?
she is the one.
Just out of curiosity, so if a law like, let's say it passes, does Portsmouth have a certain amount of time that they have to bring all of their current zoning laws, zones,
It-
up to this new law?
No, they would just have the right. And
It's called preemption. If the
It would-
state does it, it preempts our zoning.
Exactly.
It would go in effect, it said January 1st, 2026.
Okay.
Live free or die.
It's Big
So
Brother.
we could do a whole master plan and then the state says,
Yep.
Yeah, and they're asking for litigation with that kind of crazy idea.
And it's not unheard of. There's some things that are like that, the state or the federal government says, no, you have to provide zoning for this, like for adult activities. You have to, city can't, zone it out of their,
yeah, I know there were some Supreme Court cases
yeah,
that.
so stuff like, it's
you know.
not unheard of.
ADUs are similar.
Yeah. So,
Well,
one of the
allowing things is different than requiring things.
Right.
And state level zoning requirements are hardly a historic way this country's been run, but that's a different topic, so thank you for mentioning those.
yeah, no problem.
Anything else?
Public comment. I didn't want you to forget.
I didn't know.
She's been sitting there so patiently. Don't want our ratings to go down.
Is there anyone here who would like to have some public comment?
Prepared, as always. It's the review stuff, the things you wanted to know about, that you've seen 100 times.
Thanks. She's grading your work, Peter. This isn't mine.
I'm grading your work, no. Try not to, Good evening, Elizabeth Bradder, property owner, 159 McDonough Street, pseudo representing the Islington Creek neighborhood. We've been working on this rezoning since 2018. Peter, could you bring up map geo for the area, doing the themes of height? So I appreciate the fact that you're very interested in the CD4W. I just wanted to point out, because there seemed to be a little bit of confusion, I'm not sure if it was understood at the end, that CD4 and CD5 have the exact same uses, and that was the reason for the CD4. And the distinguishing difference between CD4W and CD5 is the amount of people who can be in those places. So I think most people in the neighborhood appreciate the kitchen, which is a restaurant which has excellent food. But we don't want the kitchen being 250 people who are not going to be required to have any parking. The Islington Creek neighborhood has had lots of parking issues for a long time. And even with the garage being built within 30 feet of the neighborhood, we still have a parking problem because free parking is always better than paid parking. There have been some changes made, but still parking is an issue. So that first sheet shows you that difference, so you can really get a grip on what we were talking about. The second sheet is the dimensions that Peter brought up so nicely. The third sheet is somebody had asked us about what was on 89 Hill Street. Well, it wasn't. It was 181 Hill Street. It's been renumbered. And it was stepped down originally to 3 stories on the Hill Street side. And that's their rendering. And you'll notice that the back building, they stepped up. And now both buildings are stepped up to be 4 stories next to that. So you can get an idea of the dimensions. 3 stories, 40 feet is what we'd like to see, not only on Hill Street, but also on the Foundry Street side that abuts Islington Creek. So if you look, you've got the themes up. Green is the color. There's Bridge Street. All of Bridge Street is green. See that? Right next to Islington Creek. All of Islington Creek is green, including the higher zoning along Islington Street. The only place it's brown, which is on Foundry Place. And then it goes on to the left side of Bridge Street. And if you drive down Bridge Street now that those buildings are built, the lower green on the right side as you're heading towards Maplewood Ave from Bridge Street, and the ones on the left really create a tunnel effect. It is not pretty in any way, shape, or form, although some of the buildings, they went through a lot of trouble to try to create them very beautifully. It's still like a tunnel. So on Foundry Place, what the neighborhood was hoping for, I won't touch the screen, is that this also, and along here, so all of this, all of Hill Street, Foundry Place, and Bridge Street become green to match the rest of the neighborhood and Bridge Street, which is a commercial area. So that's what we were hoping for. The reason why, for those of you who think we should have 50-foot buildings blocking the 60-foot thing, is because we'd rather have it be 40 feet because there's a grade there. And those buildings are actually 60 feet tall on the Foundry Place side because there is, as Beth mentioned, a grade that goes anywhere between, I would say it's about 8 feet to 10 feet. So when they're getting a height of 40 feet, they are actually able to compensate for that a little bit. So that was why we asked for Foundry Place and Bridge Street. The other thing that was asked for was that the downtown overlay district be removed from the neighborhood and from Bridge Street, from the Foundry Place side. So pretty much what we're looking at is the neighborhood starts on Foundry Place and goes this way and this way. And therefore, we wanted the overlay districts to be on that side and this side to have none of those. So the downtown overlay district gives you no parking. Islington Creek has a massive parking problem. It's crazy down there. People are parking there from who knows where. In the summer, we have every tourist in town coming down there and parking for free because when they get into the new parking garage, which is so nice, they look over and there's that neighborhood and you can park there for free. So why should they pay? But the garage is full. By the end of the next year or two, there won't be any more spaces in the garage. So anything built along there that doesn't have required parking and isn't going to need parking is going to be a problem. And the same thing is true for restaurants and stuff. So we already have the restaurants on Islington Street that have very limited or no parking, and those feed into the neighborhood. So we have a lot of things bringing the parking problem into the neighborhood. So that was why we wanted the overlay, the downtown overlay district to be on the other side of the Foundry Place thing, where it can be commercial. The North End Incentive Overlay District also is a problem because it allows for more height. And it allows them to expand the building footprint, and they can add another 10 more feet. So now they're getting as tall or taller than the Foundry Garage. So you've got these giant walls of 50, 60, 70-foot buildings up against historic houses. Some of the houses down in Portsmouth in that area were the original houses down there. Our house, which is further down a few more blocks, it's on the corner of Cabot and McDonough, was built in the 1700s and is on the original pictures. If you go in you go into whatever that room A is, you can see our house. It's there right now in that neighborhood. So a lot of these houses are historic, and they've been preserved by the neighbors who live there. So they don't really want huge things there. And by allowing the North End Incentive Overlay District in that neighborhood, and that's how we look at it, these houses, all of these, will be part of the neighborhood. So the neighborhood when you look at the neighborhood map, it starts at Bridge Street and goes all the way down to Dover Street. So these will be part of the neighborhood, and we'd like to see them have the lower height of 3 stories, 40 feet, get the North End Incentive Overlay District out of there because we don't want you adding another 10 feet. Because what are you going to give us? These lots are not that big. They're big for a building, but in the sense of, can you afford to put some of the things from this community space on there? Not likely. You're going to have to do community space somewhere else. So there's not likely to be community space there. And in regards to the DOD, again, it has a parking. They don't need to have parking for their commercial. And the problem with that is those people end up parking in the neighborhood, which is already full. So that was what the neighborhood was looking at. They would have liked to have had the overlay district go all the way up to Bridge Street, and the same thing with the downtown overlay. But a compromise would be to have it be just on the Foundry Place side. I think that's it. I appreciate that you're considering the CD4W, which has the better uses, a lot less intensive for a neighborhood. And like I said, the height, we were hoping to get all of Foundry Place because it does have a grade there, and nobody wants to look at a 60-foot building next to their 30-foot house. I don't think any of you would want that. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, yes.
I'm sorry to be slow on the uptake on this, but kind of looping back, when we talked about the co-living, we in my overlay, there's a affordable housing, a workforce housing component of that. There's not, to my knowledge, there's really nothing that we do that is organized around the concept of workforce housing. And there are 30 communities in New Hampshire that have overlay districts for workforce housing. So it would, if the council or others are interested in really pursuing workforce housing, it might be worth thinking of an overlay district with workforce housing, and there are plenty of examples in the state.
Is there a really good one that you've looked at?
I could give you 2, but only I don't know it firsthand.
If you want to email them to me.
I will. Okay.
You know, our friend Bill is such a staunch advocate for affordable housing at every meeting, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I want to nickname you Affordabill.
I have a question. Do we have any areas in Portsmouth that are permit parking, like residential permitted parking? So like, obviously, I used to live kind of at the end of State Street where it turned free parking, and I remember like many nights drunken people coming down my street late at night in the summer because they'd parked down there. So do we have...
I'm sorry about that, but
Coming from the saloon?
Hanover Street is the only residential street that I know of.
Okay. Have we looked into...
It's been studied. It's been a huge huge issue. But one thing that hasn't been studied, and it's just happening in some locations, is some GIS-based parking, sort of like your phone app that is meant downtown in a lot of areas now, but for residents, because what Liz was raising for a question, a concern rather, free parking in the Islington Creek neighborhood is a magnet. It will draw people. Free parking always draws people in an environment like ours. The little parking lot down at Prescott Park that has about 20 spaces generates more car trips per day than a hotel does, but people just driving in looking for the free space and driving out because there are never any spaces available. I mentioned it to the parking consultant. I'm going to mention it again to Ben Fletcher and see, because it's right on the cusp of being available, where the residents could have, they wouldn't be charged, but visitors, and then you've got to account for resident visitors or just people from away coming to park there. Those are the people you need to charge, so they park in the garage.
And that would be handled by an app in this case?
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of the challenge is we all pay taxes for those streets. And so all Portsmouth residents do. So where do you draw the line? Do you draw it to the property people owners in that neighborhood, or do you draw it to all city residents? And so that's been the historic challenge.
I know that Boston's North End has resident only. It wasn't always that way. You used to be able to, you had to pay, but you could find a spot.
Cambridge has some pretty strict resident parking requirements, and, for years they've had.
Oh yeah, my sister, she lives in Cambridge, and she got towed because she accidentally parked in the wrong residential park. She wasn't paying attention to signs. But yeah, no, she's very aware. But I was just thinking about, in the summer,
It's a good question.
many of the tourists coming in they've come here enough to know where the parking meters stop.
Well, you don't even have to
That's gonna
know.
get
You
expanded.
can get on your phone, and there were places that will tell you where the free parking is.
That's going to get expanded.
And what I mentioned is like level one of the frustration, because then there's people want visitors, they want, cleaning staff, or, a work from home kind of thing. It's just, it got very ugly.
It's not easy.
It's
It's not easy.
Very, very hard.
Yeah.
But it's a good question, and it's something that needs
And
to be
as someone
addressed.
who doesn't park in Portsmouth, do our meters do like the different rates at different times of the day? So like when parking is most, when people want to park most, it's a little more pricey?
it's-
or-
Maybe more by zone. than-
So what happens now is if you do park mobile and you stay there longer than you're allowed, you keep paying more.
Okay.
So if you park there just for the time limit, it's the base price, but your price goes up if you park for a longer period of time. One of the things that, as a city, we'd like to try to do is expand on-street parking charging, but then in certain neighborhoods, if you're a resident, you would be signed up for free. So you wouldn't get
Right.
charged.
That would
like
essentially
getting
be
the-
like a permitted.
That's what it's been talked about through all of the parking studies and everything. And that's one of the ways the city council could start to look at specific neighborhoods so that it would, if you're not a resident of Portsmouth, then you would have to pay.
So
And some of the contractors parking for 8 hours a day is also an issue.
We could go on for long.
yeah,
But I think
Parking in Portsmouth is it,
Parking's easy.
The Sweet 16 began 20 minutes ago.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Going all the way, afford a bill.